Hello, welcome to another podcast of Teachers Fight Back. I'm Bruce Fehn, and as listeners know, teachers have not only been the ones who fought back against Republican legislatures' efforts to silence teachers, so have students. And today, I'm talking with one of those students, Joyce Abraham. Hi, Joyce.
Jane Abraham.
Oh, Jayne Abraham. I'm sorry, Jayne. I beg your pardon. It's my
Okay.
writing.
That's
Jayne,
okay.
uh, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Thanks for agreeing to this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
At
for
this
having me.
time, thank you. At this time, you were a student actually at Pleasant Valley High School in Bettendorf, Iowa, and you were editor in chief of the student newspaper. It was called the Spartan Shield,
Hmm.
and now you're in your second semester at Stanford University. And while I was conducting research on House File 802, which is Republican legislation signed into law by Governor Reynolds here in Iowa, I came across one of your articles, and in it you discussed the legislation, and I knew I really wanted to interview you and talk with you about your impressions of being a student of color within the framework of a majority white school who really has worked very hard as a journalist to um, fight back, to make it known what happens to African Americans within the school setting. And one of your articles, in fact, it's called Farewell to PV. You talk about what it means to be a BIPOC student, if you can use whatever words you want, in a majority white school. So why don't we start that way? What did it mean for you to be? Well, you can tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, you have a very interesting personal background, and you arrived in Bettendorf as a 6-year-old, as I recall, and began to be a student there and were a student for many years before you graduated. So, what was it like being in the school system and schools in Bettendorf at Pleasant Valley High
Yeah.
School?
Well, thank you for that introduction. Yeah. So to give a little bit of my personal background, I was actually born in Canada, and I immigrated to the U.S. to Iowa with my parents when I was 6 years old. And my dad is Nigerian, and my mom is Russian. And then my sister, who's 14 years older than me, was also born in Russia. And then when we had immigrated to Iowa, she was attending undergraduate school um, in Ontario, I believe. So very very nuanced identity, a lot of history there. um but coming to Iowa, I think, you know that was when I discovered that there was something that made me different from other kids. And I talk about that a lot in my farewell to PV, which I think really like epitomizes my experience at PV. But yeah, I just became aware of race in a way that I didn't know that it kind of existed before. And um, that awareness kind of only heightened as I continued to be, in these majority white spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, as I got older, I started to feel this kind of sense of obligation. And I would say it really kicked off in 2020, during like the Black Lives Matter protests. Um, in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's murders and such. And at that point, I felt like as a Black individual, I had to stand up. I had to do something. If no one was going to talk about this, it had to be me, like in this community, right? And that kind of morphed into this just like feeling of obligation. And then, when we all went back to school, I started writing about all things related to race, right? I was writing about, I have some print articles as well because I started off in print, and about the model minority stereotype, something that isn't really tied to my experience at all, but I still felt that if there was someone who was going to write about it, it was going to have to be me, because I didn't feel like other people felt that kind of same sense of obligation as I did. Um, and yeah, I guess it's just like important to note too that like I am absolutely not representative of the Black community. I'm not representative of the Nigerian community, the Russian. Like I am representative of myself. And I think that that's kind of a realization that I had towards the end of my senior year, that I've spent so much time trying to speak for these different groups, but I don't really fit in well into any of these groups because I'm an individual and I have a very specific experience. But that all being said, it's still very important to me to talk about race and talk about the ways that we can change, our institutions, whether it be universities, public schools, whatever it may be, to not just be, inclusive, but appreciative and genuinely appreciative of students of color, faculty of color, people of color in general.
Hmm. Yes, and even though you have a unique biography, you did experience life sometimes as a person of color, right? A generalized person of color, and I noted that in your farewell to PV that you addressed your students by saying, uh, "To you, all I am is black, not much more. How do I know?" Right? And how you did know is that you heard the N word whispered in the halls, and fellow students confused you with other students who, and there was only 1% of the students at Bettendorf, according to the statistics, that were categorized as black. And you got unwanted questions about your skin and hair. So you felt what it means to be kind of in this monolith of a group, undifferentiated to many people, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, I really battled with my perception of myself and then also how other people saw me. And, when certain racial, incidents would happen, when that racist video at my school resurfaced and there was a lawsuit, like I felt like I needed to be involved in that, um, sort of implicitly. No one really needed to tell me, but I knew that this was something that like I needed to, in one form or another, take on.
Right. And we will get to that absolutely. That TikTok video that generated a lawsuit against the school and certain school officials, because that's really important to talk about. But is there anything that you want to mention about your experiences at school? You also mentioned that there were certain positive places within the school. I think a positive place was an actual club or a group that was formed, and students of color could find a certain measure of solidarity or comfort there. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say definitely, academically and as far as extracurriculars go, I had a wonderful experience at PV. Like I would not change anything about my high school experience. But and this is something I talk about in my farewell to PV, but school is more than just academics and extracurriculars, right? It's like the relationships you make, the people that you meet, um, and all those like formative experiences. And so in that sense, that's kind of where it wasn't, the best. But I will say with a positive place, that was definitely somewhere that I felt I could go to just like sometimes vent or just express frustration in a way that I didn't always feel like I could, or there wasn't spaces where that was warranted, if that makes sense. And you know, we did a lot of work around the school. Like we added like a welcome wall that says like welcome in a bunch of different languages, and like we made our district website translatable to like over 100 languages. And like I think we added a bunch of like multicultural holidays to the district calendar. So we definitely made efforts and participated in these initiatives, but I think where I struggled and where I struggled with even my own work with the Spartan Shield and then in Positive Place was I just felt like the problem was so much bigger than something that could be remedied by you know diversity initiatives, whatever that may be, right? Like PV is an overwhelmingly white school, overwhelmingly white faculty. Like this is a larger community cultural problem. A lot of the problems that we see at PV are a product of like it being, just not in a diverse area and all the problems that come with that for, the however many percent of students of color. So, I think that that was definitely I felt in some ways I left high school with a little bit of disillusionment just because I was like, what can we actually do here? because this feels a lot bigger than me. And I can write all I want and I can talk all I want, but like, what are the actual solutions to these like problems that are permeating in our community?
Hmm. Well, I think that in my view, we and you need to keep writing and to keep talking and to keep struggling because we have to coalesce and chip away at these issues and problems, right? And create larger political formations, raise consciousness. And I think that you really work to do that very much so in your journalistic work and from what you're describing as well, wherever you could find a space or an initiative that could be um, that could illuminate the situation of black people and call attention to racism, that seems significant. So it's kind of, one small effort at a time. Um, but what was it? And one of these, one place that I'm concerned about is the extent to which teachers might be intimidated and silenced in their efforts and chilled in their efforts to talk about um, race in the classroom. What was it like in? Do you recall? Can you recall what it was like to talk about issues of race, say, in your advanced placement history class, or an American literature class, or a government class? You'd mentioned, I think, a couple of those classes in your farewell to PV.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, academically, I had a great experience at PV, and there are lots of wonderful, wonderful teachers at PV. And, there's definitely some, and I won't name specific names here, but like there are definitely some teachers that are more outspoken and, aren't afraid to discuss these really critical issues that are often like at the core of the material of the class, like the things that we're reading or whatever watching it race and race issues, gender issues, class issues, all of that is at the core of what we're learning about oftentimes. So we do openly discuss those things in some of my classes, but then in other times, in other classes, there were times where I would notice teachers would take a step back, and I do think that that is important, right? Like there's certain subject matter where it's not really about what the teacher thinks, right? But I still think it's very important for teachers to know how to productively facilitate discussion surrounding these issues because they are sensitive topics. But just because something's a sensitive topic doesn't mean you don't talk about it. It's important. And for students like me, it it affects our everyday lives. So if we're not talking about it every day, we're at least thinking about it every day. So it really is important for teachers to know how to facilitate these discussions, and it's really sad and disheartening. I went to a couple school board meetings. It's really disheartening seeing how people demonize teachers who are underpaid, overworked, and like navigating the most strenuous like learning environment post COVID. It's really sad to see. And I just also I like school a lot, so I love my teachers. I have a special place in my heart for my teachers, but like it's just very difficult to see that. And I don't think people understand how hard it is to do what teachers do. And I've never felt indoctrinated in any way by a teacher. I've read textbooks and been like, "Oh, this feels, especially patriotic or something like that." But I've never felt, wholly influenced by anything. And maybe that speaks to me and being very set in my beliefs, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that to have discussion is so productive in classrooms. And so taking that away is like I just don't understand the point.
Right. Well, that does kind of take us to this House File 802, and you wrote an article about it.
Mm.
Do you remember how and why you were inspired to write that article? I'm trying to see. I think it was September 9th, 2021, that you may have uh, wrote it. In fact, I do have my notes here on the article. Um, you observed that the classrooms, especially English and social studies, really are places that almost require teachers to enter into this kind of terrain and to talk about issues of class, race, gender, sexual orientation, issues of the day in the American situation.
Mhm.
Um, and you express concern, as you say in the article's title, that this might chill or silence teachers, as I recall the title, or I think more accurately, suppress discussion about these issues. Do you remember at all kind of what made you want to tackle this issue? Did that stem from your attending these school board meetings, for example?
Yeah, I will say this is like one of the first articles I wrote my senior year, so I don't remember all the details, but I am pretty sure that it was coming off of the summer, and there was some school board meeting. Um and I don't remember exactly what like was said, but I remember that it was something in the realm of like limiting discussion of these topics, as you mentioned. And I remember that I reached out and emailed some like to, or I think I emailed all the school board members and kind of expressed my opinion as a student. And then, and I was kind of encouraged to do this by um, a particular teacher or advisor for a club that for the club that I was a part of. And she just said, "Hey, check this out. Like this might be of interest to you." And so I looked into it, and I was like, "Okay, this is something that I need to write about." And I had a very close relationship with my advisor, my journalism advisor. So she really helped me, and I think I might have brought the idea up to her, and she kind of helped me refine it and stuff. And yeah, I think that's how that article was born.
Hmm. Right. Um, and how? What do you recall about those school board meetings that took place in the previous summer, when there seemed to be a kind of I guess a sense of fear that began to enter some parents' minds, in which they apparently the school board felt it necessary to have a special discussion about critical race theory in particular, and whether, to what extent, teachers were talking about these issues, and that some of them disapproved of the idea that that their children were responsible for anything that happened in the past, and that they were going to feel guilty and uncomfortable. There are some people who attended, because I actually watched last night about an hour and a half worth of one of those meetings, at least in that summer of 2020. And there are at least two or three parents who stood up and said, "No, we need to talk about these things." So it was a real dispute within the community. And of course, there was just one person of color there, a person of Southeast Asian descent, who talked about her experiences with having been very much harassed in her position as a teacher at Western Illinois University, uh, by students who felt that they were being treated unfairly by her. And uh, so it seems like it was something that was in the community and a stir in the community as a result of whatever sources, and that legislators attended. There were two legislators there from the area, and that it was that it was a source of real controversy and contention, to the extent that you decided you would write about it.
Yeah, yeah. School board meetings. I like I said, I'd been to a couple, and they definitely started to get more heated. And I don't think that, the times that I went, there were so many people there. And I feel like that was never the case in the past. And I think what it's about control, right? It's parents who want to be in control of their children's education, which is, to an extent understandable. But, you know, PV is a public school, and you can't keep your kids in this like little bubble forever. And also PV is in and of itself a bubble as well. um and so just like this very reactionary response to like the possibility, even a possibility of your children maybe learning about an experience different from their own and critically analyzing that experience, like I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think that, education is important, and high school education is important. And I formed a lot of my, opinions that I have today in school and from discussions in school. But, you know, we have to be confronted with opposition in high school, or we have to be challenged in our perspective. um and so I think with the parents, the overwhelming emotion was fear. That's what I got from them, is they were scared. And I guess, like, I don't know if it's about protecting their kids. I don't know. I have no experience to understand that. But um just very, very contentious time, and like, I remember just parents being even aggressive with members of the school board and saying, we're coming for you, we're coming for your seats, and it's just become like very excessive.
Hmm. Um, right. That's very important for you to let us know about the level of contentiousness that was at work here. Um, as I listened to the school board meeting that I happened to find on YouTube, um, some of the parents that spoke seemed to think their children were going to be made to feel guilty about the about the sins of the past, and that they shouldn't have to feel guilty about those. Um, any reactions to those remarks?
I mean, yeah, I don't think it's about guilt. Like, I think it's about explaining things as they happened and critically analyzing them, right? Like, I think, coming to Stanford, like, and meeting so many people that went to like private school, and learned, like, had classes like women's history and black women's history and things like that in high school, right? Like, I feel like there's so much that, like, and obviously, like, it's difficult to facilitate something like that in a public school, but like, I feel like I never even got to learn about some of the things that I'm getting to learn about now. Like, there's words for things that I never knew there were words for. And I guess I wish that that was something that I could have had, in high school. Um and so I think, like, for it to be, for guilt to be the issue here, or for guilt to be the, I think students of color feel guilty, or I think they feel out of place, or something. And so why aren't we confronting that? Why aren't we confronting the concerns of students of color as well? And the missed opportunities that they're getting. They're not learning their history, they're not learning it as it was, or even if it's not, they're not learning about history, not even theirs, any history, as it actually happened. And I think everyone deserves that. Everyone deserves to experience that.
Right. It's it arguably that this might have a chilling effect on talking about the history of struggle in the United States, which is a noble history. It's not something to be silenced, meaning the civil rights movement, the Indian rights movement, the women's rights movement, the environmental movement. All of those are important social justice concerns and issues that are worthy of very careful attention and analysis, in addition to the overarching narrative of American history in which those forces need to be arguably included. So, turning to for a moment to a very sort of overt situation that emerged in Pleasant Valley High School that you wrote about in an article from TikTok to trial. Pleasant Valley sued over response to racist video. You wrote that just about absolutely 1 year ago today, January 29th, 2022. So that's just, what, 7 days from now, a week from now. Um, Two white students put together a vile and racist video, according to your article, in which they, I think one of them dressed as a master and another as a slave. Is this correct? And they sort of reconstructed a plantation or something akin to that, and kind of one was in blackface and laughed their way through it. So we, in this current moment, we find students being very influential in their capacity to perpetuate this kind of vile racist content. So they are actors in this kind of students, very young kids, are acting uh, in ways that seek to support white supremacy and to make the history of in this case, African Americans, a kind of joke to be shared amongst people that have like minds. Um, can you remember that incident and how you were motivated to maybe write about that?
Yeah. So I will mention that I wrote this article with the print editor in chief of the Spartan Shield, Alicia Pandit. So
Hmm.
she wrote the majority of the article. We conducted some of the interviews together, and then I wrote the introduction and the conclusion. And also, I want to make it clear that I did not watch the video. I have no interest in seeing the video, but I know the contents of the video. Um, so so yeah, I will say that, you know, I don't think that these boys that did this video or that made this video, they knew it was wrong. They knew that it was racist. But to them it's not about, perpetuating any sort of system. And I think that's why it's very dangerous, because we don't look at how, or we don't look at these in these instances, and like, how they implicitly come to be, right? Like, these boys, live in a majority white area. They have not interacted with, that many people with diverse backgrounds, whatever diverse means, right? But, with people with different experiences from them, right? They get, they have the privilege of going to a very strong public school like PV, right? And so they just lack a sense of awareness of the world. Like, you don't make videos like that, you don't do things like that when you are attuned to society and the people around you, um and the people that aren't around you also. And so I think we have to ask bigger questions here. Like, I think something that we talked about in a positive place, was what we think, their punishment should be. We didn't really have control over what their punishment would be, but we talked about, what we thought would be appropriate. And,
When you
people are throwing out. Sorry,
when you
what was
said
that?
when you said we talked about what should be appropriate as punishment, are you referring to your friends or fellow students or the people on the editorial staff?
In the Positive Place Club.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Um, so, some people were throwing out, suspension, expulsion, right? But I don't I think it's so much bigger than that, right? Like, if you expel a student who did some wrong, what is the likelihood that they're going to repeat that behavior elsewhere, right? It's very high. Um, so I think it becomes more difficult because we actually have to think about how we facilitate environments in which these things just don't happen anymore. Like, that's the real imperative. It's not, what do we do to punish this individual? It's, what do we do to show this individual that this was wrong? Because clearly they just don't care, right? Like, they get to come back to school, they get to move through their life, in the same way as they always did, and I don't ever think, a slap on the wrist is a great punishment, but I think something more restorative, is important. And so then also comes the question of, what does that look like on a majority white faculty? What does, restorative, you know, what does retribution like look like? What does that mean? Who's qualified to facilitate that? Right. So there's a lot bigger questions than, maybe immediately appear. And again, I think it all goes back to just our PV school culture, the larger community, and it just being a predominantly white area, and the impacts of that.
Hmm. Uh, as I recall, I mean, I think you sought to, or the administrators did, and school leaders did not seem to want to respond to this incident in a very well. They seemed to be slow in taking up the concerns of the parents that were involved, and the video resurfaced again, and that's when the lawsuit happened. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and I think that there's still concerns about the questions that you were raising, of a kind that you were raising. Why didn't they respond sooner? Why weren't they transparent? Why didn't they warn parents that this video was now recirculating, and that this video actually harmed the student significantly in terms of the family relationships, according to the parents. So these things have powerful effects, and I think, as you're suggesting, they need to be the history of these kinds of developments, that is, racist caricature and so on and so forth need to be talked about and discussed within the framework of schools. Kind of takes us back to House File 802, which says no divisive concepts, no no discussion of systemic racism, which I again worry that as you did in your one of your articles, that chills conversation and discussion.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I think with the TikTok video as well, like and the trial, like the administration, like I think that there, maybe are ways that they could have responded better. And I will say I don't know all the details of like the aftermath of when the article was published, also because a lot just could not be disclosed like legally. Because like they couldn't disclose, for example, like the students' names because of like I don't remember what it's called, but they just like weren't able to disclose that. Um, but like I found it to be very meaningful to have these discussions in like a club, like a positive place, and kind of pick apart the situation and talk about what we think is right and what was wrong or in the administration's response or what have you. And also we had um Jason Jones, the associate principal, I believe, would come to our positive place meetings sometimes and just listen to us, and that was really impactful. That was great. um but if you're not coming to a positive place club, you're having these conversations in the hallway, in the cafeteria, wherever, right? And so things get convoluted, things get twisted. And so I just remember by the time the article was published, there was just like not general consensus about what actually happened, especially with the video resurfacing. I'm sure a lot of um, parents or students initially thought that the video was like recently posted, but it actually, resurfaced. And the administration said that they dealt with the video when it initially came out or whatever, and then are now we're dealing with it at the time when it resurfaced. So there was just a lot going on at the time, but I think um, it was important to talk about. And so I think the impact that the article really had was just setting the record straight. And I think that that was really important.
Right now, uh, the Positive Place Club, was that a space for both students of color as well as white students?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how many people would show up to a meeting? Do you think?
It depends. So we would meet like once every 2 weeks, I believe, like on Fridays.
Okay.
So it could be anywhere from like 10 students, even less than 10, to
Hmm.
like 20, I would say. It was a pretty small club.
Yeah, but it seems like a significant number to me in
Yeah.
terms of having a core of students who are concerned and interested in these issues. A small number of students can make, I think, a considerable difference in keeping alive these issues and concerns within the framework of a school. Do you know when the club was organized? Were you involved in its organization?
I believe so. I was one of like the earlier members, but I did not found the club. But I definitely would say at times I took on, a leadership role, and I worked pretty closely with like the advisors and Mr. Jones. I talked to him quite a bit as well. Um, but it was around, I think I joined it like 2020 because I remember some of our like first meetings were on like Zoom or Google Meets or something. And then, at that time there was like two teachers and like three students, like very small. Um, but yeah, it definitely started as a discussion based club. Um, and that was really great because a space like that had not, existed for me in the past. And that was really impactful for me personally. Um, but then, it kind of turned into, okay, what do we do with all of this? We're having all these discussions. What do we do? And I think um, and I don't know where the club is at, right now, but that towards the end of the year was something that I struggled with in the club is, what can we effectively do? And I kind of spoke about this a little bit, but it's like these initiatives that like show diversity or make it seem like PV is diverse or inclusive or whatever, like that doesn't do enough. And again, it's much bigger than, putting a welcome wall that says welcome in a bunch of different languages on or near one of the entrances, right? It's more than that. So
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. How can students take action? But they have taken action. There was a teacher that used the N word in Denison, Iowa, and the students walked out. There's a teacher who talked about white nationalism in America, was arguably forced out of his position in Ankeny High School, and students walked out. Now, again, what does a walkout do? What difference does it make? It has a ripple effect. It puts people on notice that uh, those who are concerned that these issues and topics of discussion remain in circulation uh, take notice, and it gives others inspiration to do something different. So it's a slow building process. So, and again, I think that your articles that you wrote for the Spartan Shield are significant, and they make a difference. And I
Thank
want to
you.
talk with you in a minute about the Spartan Shield and what it was like to work there. But I want to keep in mind that I wanted to ask you about this. I think it was called Hair Story, right?
Yes.
Um, and this you taught me something I had not known about, which is called the Crown Act, and which prohibits, and some states have adopted it. I think the federal legislation has not yet been passed. I think there's been state initiatives. I think you wrote in 12 states, laws have been passed against hair as being a basis for not promoting or letting somebody go in a job. So uh, that discussion I found uh, very interesting, and sort of the politics of hair, really, in some ways, or how it reflects a mode of expression. And you called this attention to your readers. Can you talk a little bit about that article and your motivations for writing it?
Yeah. I mean, my identity informs a lot of what I'm interested in and what I'm interested about writing. And, you know, again, I in high school, a lot of the time I felt like if someone is going to talk about this, I want it to be me or it's going to have to be me. Um, but this one was, particularly resonant. I'm have had my fair share of insecurities as related to my own hair, and I've talked to my black friends and other black students about it, and um, I just think it's important to spotlight, to highlight, these black issues, and to make sure that okay, maybe not every student is reading the Spartan Shield, but there's something in there, or maybe you'll stumble across this and you'll learn something as related to black culture, culture different from your own. And to me, writing articles was never about necessarily how they were received. It was definitely, for me, um, just writing things that I was proud of. But when you do hear the other end of it, and you do get to talk to people, like in the hair story article, for example, I talked to Jayne Wheeler, who was like a physical education teacher at my school, and then she also was the former cross country coach. And talking to her about her experience with mixed daughters, and trying to navigate their hair, as someone who has no experience with anything like that, and how she reached out to her mother-in-law, and how her mother-in-law helped her, and how she read books and watched videos, and like that was so like beautiful to me. I thought that was amazing, and it was so special to get to talk to her about that. And I also just have a lot of love for Jayne Wheeler, Kenny Wheeler, their family. They're amazing. um and so yeah, it was really special to get to talk to someone about that, because also, like, how many people have asked Jayne Wheeler about her experience raising two mixed daughters as a wife, like who has talked to her about that? So I think it's so special to get to talk to people about things like that and highlight these perspectives that are not otherwise going to be highlighted.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love your approach to writing your articles. I mean, you do want to hear from people affected by whatever you're writing about. And one of your fellow students, there's a picture of her, I think, in the article, and a picture of Jayne Wheeler and her family, as I recall, in
Yeah.
the article. So it was interesting to hear. I can't remember what your fellow student's name was, but she talked about the variety of styles in which she wore her hair, and uh, and you talked about it in terms, I think, and framed it certainly in the title in terms of black representation and black cultural experience. I think it reflects a wonderful insistence that that representation has its wonderful attributes, right? And has its lovely modes of expression. I think that was really interesting that you would put that out there and use images in the article, and as well as talking with, and you often talked with people on the ground about what was happening. So I think that seemed to be an impressive way of doing your work. So is that sort of the Spartan Shield approach to journalism? Is that something that was encouraged by your advisor and other staff members?
Yeah, I'll say so. Hannah Harrison is the one that's in the article, and you'll probably notice that I interview her a lot because there's just not a lot of Black students in my grade, in my school, whatever. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, there is no one Spartan Shield approach, and I would say that, depending on who's editor in chief, depending on their style, and also print versus online, like things go a little bit differently. The online news cycle is a lot quicker, so we're writing an article a week. So it's very quick. So, your interviews are kind of like, who can you talk to the quickest, as opposed to maybe taking a lot of time to do a lot of research and a lot of sourcing. It's very fast paced, but that's how journalism is. Um, to me, it was just really important that people cared about journalism as much as I did. And I tried to get people to feel excited about journalism when I was editor in chief because it was exciting to me. And I just think the coolest thing ever is getting to write about things that you care about because literally nothing was off the table. Like, if you could find some way, like one way to connect any topic back to PV, like it was a go. Like, I rarely said no to like any article topic because that's just like not the way that we do things. Like, it's exciting to get to write about things that you're passionate about, and you also write better when you're passionate about what you're writing about. And also, there's a little bit of a like competitive aspect to, not really, like you can win a best of snow, which is like an award, and your like article gets posted to this like snow website or whatever, um, which is like a national like student newspaper like online organization. um so there's incentive there, and people start to get really into it, and everyone wants to win a best of snow, and it's really cool watching people get really into their jobs and their specific roles. So like I would say that what I encouraged was to let people kind of be guided by their own interests, because then I knew that we were going to, as a result of that, produce quality journalism.
Hmm. Okay. Well, it sounds like that your work as editor in chief of the Spartan Shield has served you well in preparing you for Stanford University, as well as the educational experiences that you had at Pleasant
Absolutely.
Valley High School. Is that right?
Yeah, I would 100% say so. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to close this down. Maybe I'll ask though: did you feel like you had some white allies within the framework of the school, and who supported you and kept you bolstered and happy within the framework of Pleasant Valley High School?
100%. I had great friends in high school. A lot, like a great support system. Um Maureen Dyer, like my journalism advisor, is like literally like a second mom to me. Like, she is amazing and literally like changed my life, and I don't think I would be here like without her and journalism and what that did for me. And that sounds facetious, but it's like genuinely true. I just All of my English teachers, I love it, like English is my favorite subject. So like I love all the English teachers that I ever had. Like Miss Samuelson, also Miss Russell, she was a part of A Positive Place, like the Wheelers, you know, I had like the most wonderful academic experience. And that is like absolutely not lost on me. And I will say too that I am like very privileged in the sense that like I just really like love school and I love learning. And the way that PV was, the way it functioned as an educational institution worked for me, but it doesn't work for everyone, and not everyone shares that same, academic experience as I did. So I feel so insanely fortunate because I think it set me up so well for where I am today. And I felt, very supported, you know, when by teachers and by my friends, um, and also members of administration as well. I felt respected by the administration, and they would reach out to me sometimes if they wanted to gauge my thoughts on something, or talk to me about an article or something. So that was super important as well.
Well, that's a wonderful tribute to some of your teachers. Really loved hearing that, and I hope they may listen to this podcast, and because they'll feel very, very good about themselves having heard what you just
They
said about
should. They should.
them. That's great. Well, let me let you go. I know you're busy, and I suspect you have a few projects that you have to do.
A little
As
bit. Yeah.
you set out on the second semester of your year freshman year at Stanford University. So, Jayne Abraham, thank you very much. I really
Thank you
appreciate
so
talking
much.
with you, and good luck. Take care.
Thank you. You as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.